Imagine waking up one morning with the belief that you are fully in control of your life. You choose what to wear. You choose who to speak to. You make plans, chase goals, and think that everything you do is the result of your own decisions. You live with the illusion of freedom. But what if I told you that most of what you think is a choice, is actually a repetition? What if your thoughts, your habits, your emotional reactions, even your dreams are not rooted in the present moment, but deeply entangled in experiences from the past? What if the person you are today is still being shaped, not by who you are, but by who you were forced to become? Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life." And you will call it fate. Most people read this and nod, thinking it's just a poetic metaphor. But Jung wasn't being poetic. He was being precise. This is not a concept. It's a diagnosis. You are being influenced by forces within yourself that you do not see. They are ancient, emotional, and invisible. They come from moments you forgot and from wounds you never healed. These forces do not shout. They whisper subtly, persistently, silently shaping your preferences, your fears, your patterns of love and conflict. Why do you attract the same kind of people into your life again and again? Why do you find yourself triggered by situations that others brush off without effort? Why do certain environments, tones of voice, or facial expressions make you shut down, lash out, or retreat into silence? The answer is never simply, because that's who I am. The truth is that many of the things you call personality are just adaptations to old pain, defense mechanisms hardened into identity. You are not always choosing freely, you are often reenacting, without knowing, an emotional script. Written decades ago, this is the unconscious at work. And it is not passive. It does not sit quietly in the background. It pulls. It shapes. It insists. And unless you shine a light into its depths, you will remain its servant, calling it destiny, calling it bad luck, calling it just the way things are. But if you are willing to question your most automatic reactions, to trace the roots of your emotional triggers, to explore the origins of your fears and desires, then something extraordinary begins to happen. You begin to wake up. You begin to realize that you are not broken, but buried. That beneath the patterns, beneath the projections, beneath the repetition, there is something more, something whole, something real. The path to that something is not easy. It will require looking backward with honesty. It will require listening to the parts of yourself you've ignored for years. It will demand courage, the kind of courage that dares to confront the past, not with judgment, but with curiosity, because the unconscious is not your enemy. It is a forgotten map, a story unfinished, a locked room filled with meaning. And everything you've been running from might be the very thing that sets you free. To understand how the past still controls you, we need to look at how it first took hold from the moment you're born. You're not just entering the world, you're entering a system of beliefs, expectations, rules, fears, and roles that were never yours to begin with. You are named before you can speak. You are rewarded before you can choose. You are punished before you understand. And so, you begin to shape yourself to fit the mold you're placed in. But this shaping is not just about behavior. It becomes psychological architecture. You learn what emotions are safe to express. You learn which parts of yourself are loved and which are met with silence, anger, or withdrawal. Over time, these lessons are absorbed into the unconscious, forming the blueprint of how you relate to others and how you relate to yourself. This is where the concept of the persona comes into play. Jung described the persona as the social. Mask the version of you that you put on to survive in a world that often doesn't welcome your full truth. It is not inherently bad. It helps you function. It allows you to navigate relationships and play your roles. But problems arise when you forget that it's a mask. When the persona becomes fused with your identity, you begin to believe that the performance is who you are. You suppress anything that doesn't match the image you've created. You hide your sadness behind strength. You hide your confusion behind certainty. You hide your needs behind independence. And slowly, the authentic self begins to disappear beneath layers of adaptation. But what happens to the parts of you that don't fit the mask? They don't vanish. They are not deleted. They are exiled, pushed down into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not a flaw. It is simply everything you've denied, rejected, or forgotten within yourself. It holds your rage, your grief, your shame, but also your intuition, your desire, your creativity, your wildness. The shadow is not darkness, it is light, turned away from. And here's the truth: the more you suppress it, the more it controls you. Not directly, not openly, but through projection. Projection is the unconscious act of attributing your own disowned traits onto others. You see in them what you refuse to see in yourself. You judge what you secretly fear you might be. You hate what you once were, or what you are never allowed to become. Have you ever been irrationally irritated by someone's confidence? Have you found yourself deeply uncomfortable around vulnerability, weakness, or even joy? Have you ever felt a strong emotional reaction that seemed disproportionate to the moment? This is the shadow speaking. This is the past, alive in the present, and it doesn't stop there. Patterns formed in early life, in childhood, adolescence, or trauma become so familiar that they begin to feel like truth. If love was conditional, you may grow to believe you must perform or sacrifice to be loved. If emotions were unsafe, you may shut them down completely, numbing yourself not just to pain, but to beauty, the worst part. Most of this happens without your awareness. The unconscious is not some passive archive. It is an active, living presence. It dreams, remembers, reacts, manipulates, and repeats. It pushes you into situations that feel eerily similar to the past because repetition is its language. That's why you find yourself in the same kinds of relationships. That's why you keep facing the same inner battles. That's why growth feels like a loop, not a ladder. Because your unconscious is not trying to torture you, it's trying to get your attention. It repeats what you haven't resolved. It presents you with versions of the same story, over and over again, hoping that one day you'll stop, turn around, and finally listen. This is where healing begins. Not by escaping the past, but by confronting it. Not to dwell, not to blame, but to understand. To recognize how your patterns were born and how they can be unlearned, because once you see the pattern, you're no longer trapped in it. And once you feel the wound, you can begin to heal it. But first, you must be willing to go back, not to relive it, but to reclaim what was lost there. Most people believe that growth is about adding something new, learning a new habit, building a new mindset, chasing a higher goal. But true growth often begins by subtracting, by peeling away the layers that never belonged to you, by unlearning the false narratives you were taught to believe. And to do that, you need to ask one of the most difficult questions a person can ask. Whose voice is speaking in my head? The voice that tells you you're not good enough. The voice that tells you to stay quiet. The voice that demands perfection before worthiness. Where did that voice come from? It wasn't born with you. It was planted. Perhaps by a parent who praised achievement more than effort. Perhaps by a teacher who shamed mistakes. perhaps by a culture that measures value in productivity. Over time, these external voices are absorbed and repeated until they become indistinguishable from your own. This internalization creates what Jung called complexes, clusters of emotional energy centered around specific experiences or people. A father complex, a mother complex, a trauma complex. These complexes operate like inner personalities. They have their own feelings, their own triggers, their own agendas. And they activate automatically, often in the moments when you feel most vulnerable. Have you ever felt like a small child in the middle of a conflict? Have you ever reacted with an intensity that surprised even yourself? Have you ever known what the right thing was and done the opposite anyway? That's not weakness. That's not failure. That's a complex in motion, an old pattern reawakening in a new context. These patterns are not random. They are rooted in emotional survival. When you were younger, your nervous system adapted to your environment in the only ways it knew. How? If love was inconsistent, you may have become hypervigilant, always reading the room, always anticipating needs. If expression was punished, you may have learned to silence yourself to stay small, to avoid being a burden, and because these strategies once kept you safe, part of you still clings to them even when they no longer serve you. This is the tragedy of unconscious living. The defenses you built to survive the past are now the very structures that imprison you in the present. They affect how you communicate, how you set boundaries, how you trust, how you fall in love, how you leave, how you stay. You begin to call your wounds standards. You call your defenses independence. You call your fear of rejection discernment. But deep down, there's a quiet knowing, a discomfort, a restlessness, a question that won't go away. What if I'm not being myself? The reason that question is so powerful is because it echoes a deeper truth. You remember what it felt like, even faintly, to be whole, before the masks, before the performance, before the past was louder than your present. That memory, even if buried, even if silent, is your soul's way of reminding you that there is more than the script you've been handed, more than the roles you've been assigned, more than the wounds that still whisper through your choices. But you won't access that more by rushing ahead. You'll find it by going back, slowly, gently, honestly. You'll find it by turning toward the very moments you've tried to forget, not to relive the pain, but to rescue the part of you that got left behind in it, because that part still lives in you. It's the part that hesitates when opportunity knocks, the part that shuts down when conflict rises, the part that believes love must be earned or lost, and no amount of success, strategy, or surface-level healing will reach it. Until you go there, until you return, there is a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when a person begins to realize that they are repeating themselves, not just in words or habits, but in choices, relationships, emotional patterns that seem to loop back endlessly. You try something new, and somehow it ends the same. You meet someone different, and yet the same wound opens again. It's as if the circumstances change, but you remain inside the same invisible shape, a pattern that doesn't just guide your behavior. It defines your experience of reality. Carl Jung believed that these patterns are not mere coincidences. They are archetypal movements, deeply embedded psychological imprints that replay until they are understood. They are not punishments. They are invitations to recognize what has remained unresolved, invitations to witness the deeper story beneath the surface events of your life. Because until you become conscious of the pattern, you are bound to it. This is why change feels so difficult. It's not just about breaking habits or learning new information. It's about confronting the root beneath the behavior, the emotion that fuels the cycle, and often, that emotion is pain, but not the pain you feel in the moment. It's older than that. It's pain that has been waiting stored in the body, hidden in the unconscious, woven into your reactions. It's the pain of abandonment that makes you chase unavailable people. The pain of shame that makes you overachieve. The pain of fear that keeps you silent in moments that require your voice. You might think you've moved on. You've grown. You've healed. And in many ways you have. But the unconscious doesn't care about surface victories. It stores what hasn't been felt. It holds what was never given space, and so it shows up not to hurt you, but to be held. It shows up in your anxiety before something new. It shows up in your resistance to love. It shows up in your inability to rest, even when you're safe. Most people try to escape this by staying busy, by staying in motion, by staying distracted. And in a world that rewards speed, silence, and suppression, this avoidance often goes unnoticed, even praised. But beneath the productivity, beneath the performance, the past waits. Quietly, patiently. It waits not for your perfection, but for your attention. And when you finally slow down, when the noise fades, and you're left with yourself, the questions return. The ones you've avoided, the ones you fear. Why do I still feel empty? Why do I still need so much validation? Why can't I feel satisfied, even when everything seems fine? These are not problems to solve. They are messages. Messages from the parts of you that were never given a voice. The child who learned to shrink to avoid punishment. The teenager who never felt seen. The adult who buried grief beneath responsibility. When Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, he wasn't talking about achievement. He was talking about integration. Not climbing higher, but going deeper. Not becoming someone new, but reclaiming who was lost. This process is not linear. It does not happen on a timeline. It unfolds like a spiral, bringing you back to the same places again, but with new eyes, a new heart, a greater capacity to hold what was once unbearable. And as you spiral inward, you begin to notice something else. The things you used to run from no longer hold the same power. The memory still exists, but it no longer defines you. The pain still echoes, but it doesn't paralyze you. You see the pattern and you choose differently. That's the quiet miracle of becoming conscious. Not that you erase the past, but that it stops controlling the present. Not that you forget who you were, but that you remember who you are, and from that remembering, everything begins to shift. There comes a moment in this inner journey when you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you begin to ask, "What happened to me?" It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything, because when you stop viewing your patterns as personal flaws and begin to see them as adaptations to pain, you no longer blame yourself for the ways you've coped. You begin to understand that what you called weakness may have once been survival. What you called failure may have been protection. What you called brokenness was a kind of intelligence, a way your psyche learned to keep you intact. Carl Jung understood this. He knew that the unconscious wasn't a graveyard. It was a living system filled with meaning, filled with memory, filled with potential. And within it are not just the parts of you that suffered, but the parts that never had the chance to live. That's why healing is not just about removing pain, it's about restoring life. It's about giving space to emotions you once silenced. It's about allowing yourself to grieve the things you never thought you were allowed to mourn. It's about letting go not of people or moments, but of the false identities you created. To survive them, one of the most difficult aspects of this process is that it often doesn't feel like progress. In fact, it can feel like regression. You begin to feel emotions more intensely. You remember things you thought were forgotten. You become aware of wounds that have been dormant for years, but this is not you falling apart. This is the unconscious. Becoming conscious. This is your system releasing what it has held in silence for too long. You may feel anger, the kind you never expressed. You may feel sadness, the kind you never allowed. You may feel fear not because something is wrong, but because you're finally letting yourself feel what's real. This is the sacred discomfort of transformation. And it is necessary because for most of your life, you've been trying to fix symptoms. You've tried to become more confident, more disciplined, more productive. But rarely have you stopped to ask, who taught me that I'm not enough unless I'm performing? Who taught me that my worth depends on how much I do? Who taught me that rest is weakness, that emotion is failure, that vulnerability is danger? These teachings didn't come from nowhere. They were passed down through culture, through family, through subtle experiences that shape the lens through which you see the world. And if they were learned, they can be unlearned, but unlearning takes more than insight. It takes presence. You have to be with what arises, not analyze it from a distance. You have to feel the shame, the fear, the grief, not to drown in it, but to witness it fully. Because once you witness it without judgment, it begins to release its grip. That's how healing moves, not in grand moments, but in quiet decisions. The decision to pause when you want to run. The decision to speak when you've always stayed silent. The decision to soften when your instinct is to harden. These are small revolutions. And over time, they change everything. You stop living from reaction and start responding with awareness. You stop needing to control and start learning how to trust. You stop fearing your past and begin to make peace with it, not because the pain disappears, but because it no longer defines who you are becoming. Reaching the end of this journey does not mean you are finished. In fact, it only means you have begun to see clearly, because what once looked like coincidence now reveals itself as pattern. What once felt like failure begins to make sense as adaptation. And what you thought was personality is often revealed as defense, a carefully constructed shield built from experiences you never had the chance to fully process. You are no longer blind to your own movements. You see the moment you shut down before conflict. You notice the tension in your body when someone gets too close. You catch yourself rehearsing explanations to avoid rejection, or biting your tongue to keep the peace. And for the first time, instead of criticizing yourself for these patterns, you begin to ask why they are there. You begin to see that they were never signs of weakness, they were signs of intelligence. They were coping mechanisms, forged in moments of emotional survival, held in place for years by fear, habit, and silence. Carl Jung believed that true transformation begins the moment you stop identifying with the mask and begin engaging with the parts of you that exist beneath it, not to destroy them, but to understand them, to integrate them, to bring them into relationship with your conscious self. That process, individuation, is not glamorous, and it is never quick. It is not a series of breakthroughs that solve your life, but a continuous unfolding of deeper awareness. It is the willingness to live in the complexity of who you are without needing to simplify it into good or bad, light or dark, healed or broken. Because when you stop seeing yourself as a problem to fix and begin seeing yourself as a story to understand, your relationship with the past changes. It stops being a burden to carry and becomes a map, one that leads you not back into pain, but forward into meaning. You may still feel the echoes of old wounds, but now they speak in a language you recognize. You may still be triggered, but now you pause before reacting, because you know that pain is not always about the present moment. You may still struggle, but the struggle becomes conscious and therefore changeable. This is what it means to make the unconscious conscious. Not that life becomes easy, but that it becomes real. Not that suffering disappears, but that it becomes honest, no longer hidden, no longer in control. You find yourself less interested in proving who you are, and more curious about uncovering what's been hidden. You speak more slowly, not because you're unsure, but because you are aware of what your words carry. You connect with others from a place of depth, not performance, because you have met yourself there first, and slowly, everything begins to shift, not because you've become someone new, but because you've stopped abandoning the person you've always been. This is the freedom Jung spoke of, not the freedom to be anything, but the freedom to be whole. The freedom to walk through life no longer haunted by invisible scripts. The freedom to remember that the story you inherited is not the story you have to live, and perhaps most importantly, the freedom to face your past not with fear, but with presence, to sit with it, to listen to it, and to let it evolve into something that supports your growth, instead of blocking it, because the past will always be part of you. But it doesn't have to control you. Not anymore.